Good evening, Link Sisters, to all of our wonderful participants who've taken their time to come on to this wonderful Eastern Area Legislative and Public Affairs Town Hall meeting tonight. We welcome you and we thank you. You are in store for a wonderful, informative, enlightening, and really just a great time to be in fellowship with your Link Sisters. So I welcome you. I thank you. My name is Evelyn Sample Oates, and I am the co-chair of our Legislative and Public Affairs Committee for the mighty Eastern Area, along with my partner, who I will introduce you to momentarily. I am just delighted. I am from the Philadelphia, the founding chapter of the Links Incorporated. And again, I'm excited to have you here tonight. Let me introduce to you some of our very important participants who are with us tonight and you will hear from. Of course, we have our Eastern Area Director, Link Shawana Tucker Sims is on the call, and our Eastern Area Legislative and Public Affairs Co-Chair, my partner, my friend, my sister, Link Nicole Venable. And you will hear from Nicole shortly. We also have our mighty Eastern Area Program Chair, Link Rhonda Crowder, who is on the call with us. I stopped saying call because this is a Zoom meeting and we are seeing each other and loving on each other with our beautiful faces as we are sheltering and staying in the home, but we still look good. We may not have been to the hairdresser or the nail salon, but we still look good, Link Sisters. We also have our Eastern Area National Trans and Services Chair, Link Tanya Longino. Our Eastern Area Legislative and Public Affairs Committee members, Link Veronica Delandro, Link Onita Myers, Link Kim Robinson, Link Joni Ivy, and special thanks to one of our Link sisters who I'll introduce shortly, who did our wonderful, helped us tonight with all of our invitations and logistics tonight. And you will meet her shortly, and that's Link Simone Sanders from the DC Capitol chapter. Thank you for being here. We also have, we are blessed and fortunate to have our national officers and appointed executive council officers who are with us tonight. Our international president of the Links Incorporated, Link Kimberly Jeffries Leonard, Link Karen Morrison, who is the national chair of the Links Legislative and Public Affairs Committee, is on with us tonight. And one of her members, Link Danielle Turnipseed, committee member for Legislative Public Affairs, is on the call with us tonight as well. And we want to also recognize one of our mighty Link sisters who helped make tonight possible, and that is Link Tanya Lombard. She is our corporate sponsor for AT&T. And we want to take a moment, yes, give her plenty of love and recognition. We want to recognize AT&T, who is our corporate partner, and Link Tanya Lombard of the Capital City DC chapter offered to partner with the Eastern Area on the legislative conference that we were originally supposed to have today in Washington, DC. But because of the circumstances that we are dealing with on a national and international level, we had to do it virtually instead of in person. But Link Tanya was offering the wonderful AT&T Forum in Washington, D.C. for us to hold this legislative day today. And we want to just thank AT&T for their strong support and Link Tanya for her visionary leadership and advocating for issues that matter through the Humanities of Connection initiative. So Link Tanya, thank you so much for making this possible. We also, tonight, we're going to hear from some wonderful, strong Link sisters who are doing it and taking care of business on a national level and in their respective states. And I'm proud to introduce Congresswoman Lauren Underwood from Illinois. Thank you, Congresswoman. Miss Ashley Etienne, who is the communication director for the office of that powerful woman that you see on TV night after night, the office of our speaker, Pelosi. So she is here representing Miss Ashley Etienne, is representing the office of the speaker, and she's the communication director and maybe the very first African-American woman to serve as the communication director for the speaker. We also have Link Lee Chapman, director of Voting Rights Program, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights is with us tonight. And you're going to hear from those powerful sisters tonight. I want to thank all Link sisters for being here tonight and all of our other guests who are here to share about this powerful message with the Eastern area. And at this moment, I want to introduce our dynamic, our extraordinary, our phenomenal Eastern Area Director, Link Shawana Tucker Sims.
Good evening, and thank you so much, Link Evelyn, for that introduction. And thanks to each and every one of you for participating in this evening's session, Black Women, Leadership, Issues, and Advocacy. I have a question for everyone this evening. Do you hear it? The nation is calling for truth in the midst of confusion, unity of purpose in a time of division, leadership in a time of uncertainty, leadership, issues, advocacy. We were made for this moment. Black women stepping up to do what we have always done, caring for family, creating community, and making a way out of no way. The Links were born out of this tradition of strong, purposeful Black women almost 75 years ago, when two matrons in Philadelphia asked friends to join them in answering the call to advocate for a better life for those of African descent in the segregated America. Today, our organization stands over 16,000 strong on our legacy of using our voices, our influence, and our resources to help our community shape a better today in a segregated America. Today, our organization, leadership, issues, advocacy. It is not an overstatement to note that we stand at an inflection point in history, a trifecta of circumstances never seen before. The devastation of COVID-19 within our communities runs along the fault lines of the underlying inequities in access to health care, nutritious food, and economic opportunities, to name a few. It is also the year of the census within our communities that have been historically undercounted, and time for a critical presidential election as communities find themselves once again dealing with challenges of access to the elections process and voting rights. Both the census and the presidential election will determine the division of focus, funding, and resources for education, social services, infrastructure, and elected and appointed officials for years to come. Leadership, issues, advocacy. The stakes are high, and this strategic discussion is timely. We cannot afford to be silent or inactive. We have a powerhouse lineup of women to inform and inspire us this evening. Congresswoman Underwood, Ashley Etienne, and Lee Chapman are living examples of the power of leadership, issues, and advocacy. So we thank them for joining us this evening and are looking forward to the conversation. We also thank Tanya Lombard and AT&T for sponsoring this virtual town hall, making it possible for us to gather. And finally, an event like this does not happen by itself. Special thanks to Links Evelyn Sample Oates and Nicole Venable for their leadership of our Eastern Area Legislative Committee and for coordinating this Eastern Area Town Hall meeting. Leadership, issues, and advocacy. We hope you will leave energized, informed, and well-equipped to advocate in your communities. Thank you, and let's get started.
Thank you, Madam Area Director. Now, my Link sisters, you're in for a treat. We have a special guest tonight that we didn't originally advertise, but she has been working behind the scenes so hard, helping us make tonight possible with a lot of the logistics that happen. And as busy as she is, she took the time to help her sisters, her Link sisters, make sure that everything was perfect for tonight. And I want to ask her just to speak for a few minutes with us tonight. You know her, you've seen her, you've heard her voice loud and strong on the television, on your internet, on your computers. She has been around. She is Link Symone Sanders, who is the senior advisor to Vice President Joe Biden. And you've seen her, you know her, Link sister. She's one of us. and she is making a true difference. And I'm going to ask Link Simone. She's very talented. You've seen some of her talents, especially when she became the body woman for the Vice President Biden. When someone jumped up on the stage and tried to attack him, Link Simone was right there making sure that the former vice president was safe and sound, because she is a strong woman of principle and character. So I'm going to ask Link Simone if she will come on and share a few words with her Link sisters.
Link Evelyn, that was a very strong introduction. Link Simone is trying to get her video to work right now. So she's calling in, and we're trying to make sure that her video is starting. What I will do, since we're still trying to make sure that's working, is we have the Congresswoman patiently waiting. And so we're going to go ahead and start with her, and then we're going to go to Link Simone, and then Ashley, and then Lauren. So good evening, my Link sisters, and all of our guests and everyone. Again, my name is Link Nicole Venable. I am the Eastern Area Co-Chair for Legislative and Public Affairs. I hail from the Capital City chapter in Washington, D.C., and I'm very excited to be with you this evening and share with you some very important and critical information. We are so excited to have Congresswoman Lauren Underwood with us this evening. Lauren, the Congresswoman serves as Illinois' 14th Congressional District, where she was sworn as the first woman, the first person of color, the first millennial, and the youngest African-American woman to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives. That's, amazing, but what got her there was also amazing. In Congress, Congresswoman serves on 3 of the most powerful committees: the Ed and Labor Committee, the Veterans Affairs Committee, and Homeland Security Committee. She's also a member of the Congressional Black Caucus and recently started the Black Maternal Health Caucus with Congresswoman Alma Adams. Under President Obama, and this is really interesting and amazing, under President Obama, the Congresswoman served as the senior advisor in the Department of Health and Human Services, where she helped communities across the country prevent, prepare for, and respond to disasters, bioterror, and public health emergencies. So she is the perfect person to join us this evening to share key insights about the COVID crisis and everything that is now our sort of new normal. So Congresswoman, we'd love to hear from you now. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nicole. Hi, ladies. I'm so glad to be with you today. I heard that your President Leonard, is on. Hello. And also wanted to thank Evelyn Sample Oates and Ms. Shawana Tucker Sims, and the whole long list of just esteemed individuals who are on the call this evening. I appreciate the invitation. And I'm sorry that we couldn't meet in person in the Capitol. We were all very excited about your meeting, but we all adapt, don't we? And grateful for these kinds of video conferencing opportunities. So like Nicole mentioned, I represent a community in Northern Illinois outside of Chicago. It's a suburban and rural community. It's the community I grew up in, and I flipped a seat in 2018 and joined the 116th Congress. In my career, I've worked as a nurse and worked to help connect the American people with affordable healthcare coverage. I have a master's in public health, and so, as Nicole mentioned, did serve in the Obama administration to help the country really prepare for public health emergencies and disasters. And so had President Obama been in office and we encountered the coronavirus, it was our team that would be leading the response. And so have many thoughts about ways that we can make improvements and protect the health and well-being of the American people. I also spent several years implementing the Affordable Care Act. And so this idea of connecting underserved communities, vulnerable communities, communities of color, and really all people with the health care that they need is something that has fueled my work during this last year and a half in the 116th Congress. The Illinois 14th is a district that is suburban and rural. We have a population that's less than 3% Black. And so I don't have the great fortune of having conversations like this evening so often in my community. And so this is a real treat for me. The committees that I serve on, we are working on a number of items that may be of interest to you. And so happy to take questions about things if they're on your mind. Education and labor, we have jurisdiction over K-12 and higher education. We do worker protections like paid family leave and affordable childcare, and also labor unions. And we have jurisdiction over employer-sponsored healthcare coverage, which is how I landed on the committee. The majority of the American people get their healthcare coverage through their jobs. And so this is a really powerful opportunity for us to lower healthcare costs and expand coverage throughout the country. On Homeland Security, I serve as the vice chair on that committee, and we have jurisdiction over counterterrorism and cybersecurity. We have oversight over FEMA, which is so important in this COVID-19 response, as FEMA is the lead federal agency that's in, so many of the communities, distributing the supplies from the Strategic National Stockpile, helping to coordinate these, they call them air bridge flights, which are the supplies coming over from our overseas suppliers to make sure that our healthcare heroes have the personal protective equipment and that we don't have first responders and essential workers getting exposed to the disease while they're doing their jobs every day. And then our committee also has some jurisdiction along the US-Mexico border. And so we've been fighting against the wall and trying to make sure that we're leading with our values while trying to protect so many of the migrant individuals who are being detained under inhumane circumstances thanks to the Trump administration. And then finally, I serve on Veterans Affairs. Women veterans are the fastest growing segment of our veterans population. And yet the VA as an agency, in their mission statement, they talk about serving men. And so it's been a challenge to help modernize that agency to better care for the women that have so ably and capably served our country. We also did co-found the Black Maternal Health Caucus about a year ago. So we know that Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die as a result of childbirth in our country. That statistic has been unchanged during my entire lifetime, and I'm 33 years old. And there's never been a nationwide initiative or endeavor from the federal departments and agencies to reduce this significant disparity. I think that's wrong. And so working with Congresswoman Alma Adams and Senator Kamala Harris, we were so pleased to be able to introduce a comprehensive suite of legislation called the Momnibus. It's an omnibus, which is a group of bills, but for moms, a play on words, if you will, so that we are able to tackle things like social determinants of health and increasing the perinatal workforce, incorporating technology like telehealth, which is what we're all relying on right now. So many of the moms are getting their visits with their providers from home thanks to telehealth interventions, but those aren't always offered in our communities. And we need to make sure that that gets improved. And so that's a piece of legislation that we're really excited about championing and seeing some movement the rest of the year. We know that disparities have long existed in Black communities. And with the COVID-19 virus, we know that individuals with a history, a pre-existing condition, heart disease, lung disease, kidney disease, and diabetes are more likely to have severe and often fatal cases of COVID-19 if they become infected. We also know that existing disparities, whether healthcare or economic, often get exacerbated during times of emergencies and disasters. One could say even that you could anticipate that there might be a disparity in African American death rates with respect to COVID-19. What has been shocking to all of us is the extent of this disparity. So I'm from Illinois, and the state of Illinois has been one of very few. There's only 10 states, plus the District of Columbia, that has been collecting COVID data by race and ethnicity and reporting it publicly. And in our state, African Americans make up 15% of the population in our state, but represent 42% of the fatalities. That's statewide. Within the city of Chicago, African Americans represent 70% of the fatalities. That is a disparity that is unprecedented, I would say. And it's a result of systematic underinvestment in communities of color. It's a result of whole communities not being served by our healthcare system. And it's a result of people not being targeted and focused with their testing. So there's many people walking around with active infections, spreading it around the community as they go about their essential jobs. We know that so many of the American people do not have a job that lends itself to working from home. And so they must go to work every day, oftentimes relying on public transit that's been reduced, right? So the buses are full, the trains are packed as people are seeking to go to work every day. And if there's no testing in our communities, or very difficult to reach testing in our communities, it's no wonder that people are getting sick. So working with my colleagues, Karen Bass, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Robin Kelly, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Brain Trust, Health Brain Trust, Senator Durbin from our state, and obviously the great Ayanna Pressley. We introduced a piece of legislation a couple weeks ago to try to standardize this data collection and reporting around race and ethnicity, and then require the Centers for Disease Control to make those findings public. It's very, very, very important that we have this data in order to save lives. It's no secret that the response to COVID-19 has been flawed. It's no secret that it's been inequitable, and it's no secret that our communities have struggled to access the tests, treatment, healthcare resources, personal protective equipment. It's no secret that we've been left out of these small business loans with the Paycheck Protection Program because so many of the banks that we use were not able to even participate in that lending program. And it's no secret that disinformation spreads rapidly throughout our communities. Why is that? Because foreign adversaries have targeted us, specifically African Americans, to try to discourage us from seeking healthcare. You might have read in the news that there was a rumor that African Americans were somehow inherently immune to COVID-19. Not true, and it spread like wildfire. I mean, these are the things that we're up against. And so as each of you do your work, I know that you have a census initiative. I think that's fantastic. But if you are talking with your friends and neighbors and colleagues about COVID-19, start at the fundamentals. Try to connect them with local community resources, because this is going to take an effort on individual outreach to make sure that everybody is getting the help that they need. And we are here to support you in the United States Congress. I'll stop there. Happy to answer any questions. And thank you again for the invitation.
Oh, that was such an amazing sort of an eye-opening discussion that you gave. I mean, I think I heard, in my sort of Facebook feeds, I'm not sure if we can get it.
Right.
And I think, it was very much sort of shocking to see when the stories started to come out about the disproportionate impact of COVID in our communities. I mean, shocking. And it's a travesty. We do have, ladies, on the if you are listening and you have a question for the Congresswoman, you're able to put it into the chat function and I can read it. So Congresswoman, we do have a couple of questions lined up here for you.
Right.
This one from Crystal Mullins, and she asked, Congresswoman Underwood, given the COVID-19 crisis, what will the Congress do to assure that we can all vote in November? The president has dismissed vote by mail. Will Congress pick this up?
So we are actively fighting. This is one of the most essential reforms that we need to create opportunities for every state to be able to quickly roll out vote by mail. As you know, elections are administered locally, either by state authority or local authorities. And so often it's up to the federal government to provide resources, meaning funding and guidance to help those states implement these different voting modalities. And so voter suppression is rampant. And it can happen by mail. So we sort of have a dual track, or maybe three things that we need to do in Congress. One is to pass a mandate that every state offer vote by mail, that it's open for a certain number of weeks, that people are able to vote without having to source their own postage, things like that. Two, we must offer additional funding resources to help states implement this program. The Senate, under Mitch McConnell's leadership, Republican out of Kentucky, has only been willing to fund one tenth of what is required in order to properly secure our election ahead of 2020. And this was even before we had the COVID pandemic. This was just when we had the threat of foreign interference in our election, right? The Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, and all those who seek to harm the United States. And so we've got to work with, when you talk about advocacy, we've got to work with our Republican colleagues in the Senate to help them understand how critically important this constitutionally outlined right to vote is, and the way that we need to get these resources to the states in order to roll out the vote by mail. The last thing we have to do is guard against voter suppression. This is going to be an issue that will have to happen state by state. Okay, so I live in a state that has some of these protections, but many of you may not. And each state law is different, right? Voter ID requirements, signature requirements, and the like. So don't assume that just because Congress acts that you're totally protected. And so we need to be taking a look at those state laws right now.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Lynn Selby. Where can we get more information on the bill regarding data collection and reporting to the CDC?
So I can put it in the chat, and then one of you can circulate it. How about that? I'll do that as soon as I finish my remarks, because I'd be happy to have everybody's eyes on it, and we would love your voices to amplify the importance of this legislation.
Okay, hold on, let me see here. We heard you mention telehealth, and we know that only happens with the right technology in place. With one of your priorities being infrastructure, do you foresee a focus on providing funding for rural broadband?
Rural broadband is critical. Listen, I live 45 minutes west of Chicago. My district stretches out maybe an hour and a half outside the city, and we have whole counties that are not connected. It's outrageous to be in a metropolitan area, so I understand the challenge across the country. We do expect the last phase of COVID recovery to include a significant infrastructure investment as we work to put America back to work. And so we know that there's lots of jobs, including clean energy jobs that can be in the construction sector that can help to rebuild America, and not just roads and bridges, but must include rural broadband access. And so we're looking forward to transitioning to that phase of the recovery, and look forward to everybody's advocacy to make sure that it happens and those dollars get to our communities, which is so important.
Great. Last two questions. We have how will Congress ensure that the small and minority businesses get their fair share of the Paycheck Protection funds in the second round? And the last question, so I can do this quickly, is can you talk a little bit about how you see the census collection going so far?
Okay, so the Paycheck Protection Program, we have authorized another 310 billion. Ashley can give you the exact figure, 310 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program, of which there's a $60 billion, billion with a B, carve out for something called CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions, and the Minority Depository Institutions, which in layman's terms are community banks and Black banks. And so it's a carve out protected amount of money to help people who may run cash only businesses, may not have lending relationships with the big banks like Wells Fargo or JP Morgan Chase and the like, to make sure that those dollars can flow into our communities. We're going to have to do some work though to make sure that people know that this money is there and that they need to reach out to their institution. And if their institution is not already something like a certified lender already participating in these lending programs with the federal government, that they can get certified to do it. So all this is happening concurrently under the leadership of Chairwoman Maxine Waters, who you know cares a lot about making sure that our communities get these resources. And so we have our eye on the ball. So that's the Paycheck Protection Program. Keep your eye on it. The resources are coming. We're going to pass the bill tomorrow. With respect to the census, we know that the census is so critically important to getting resources into the Black community. We know that the most traditionally undercounted group of people, census after census, are kids under 5. Think about that loved one in your life. And we know that so often there might be custody battles, or sometimes the baby stays with the mom, sometimes it's with grandma, sometimes it's with the other side of the family. And so that kid doesn't end up getting counted. Think about the impact of that undercount on that child's life for the next 10 years as they go through our school systems, need resources from parks and the rest. The work that you're doing on the census is so important, and I thank you for that outreach. We know that the Census Bureau, in response to COVID-19, has extended some deadlines. I have some real doubts around their sincerity and the reason for the extension. We know that the Trump administration has sought to put up real barriers to the collection and complete count in communities of color. And so this makes our oversight and the rigor of that oversight even more important. However, that's on the Congress side of things. What's most important is that everybody take the opportunity to be counted in your communities. Right now in my community, we're averaging around 55, 60% counted, which means we have some work to do, particularly when we can't go knock on doors. So, you know, we have some progress to make around the country. This is the first digital census. We know everybody doesn't have the resources to log online and do it. And so, you know, all the outreach that you do will be a big help.
Great, thank you. Well, if we, let me see here. I think we're at our time's end. There was one last question that you haven't really addressed. So if you have time for one more, okay, great. This said, and this gets into a kind of a different issue, but you know, I think it's not lost on many of us, the role that you've been playing on the Homeland Security Committee. And we have a question that says, has the Homeland Security Committee been following right-wing hate groups as domestic terrorists?
100%. And the rise of domestic terrorism, this past week was the 25th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing, and the rise of particularly white supremacist domestic terrorism is something that our committee has really grappled with. Here's what I want to leave you with. This is often viewed under partisan lens, right? Because there's a lot of overlap between the white supremacists, think Charlottesville, and their political affiliation with the Republican Party. But behind the closed doors, you turn off the TV cameras, you get the staff out the room, and we're in a classified setting. My Republican colleagues are equally as concerned, they are equally as dismayed, and they are looking for a robust counterterrorism response in response to this domestic terrorism threat. This kind of ugliness and hatred is un-American. And while they don't have the courage to say so publicly, there is bipartisan support for these initiatives. So as you do your advocacy, I would raise it as an issue. I would try to get your member on the record if you are represented by a Republican member, and offer to work with them in facilitating a community dialogue. I think that some folks just aren't fluent in the language, and so they're just scared to address the issue. But we are certainly eager to work on it. The chair of the counterterrorism subcommittee is one of my freshman colleagues. His name is Max Rose, and he's really embraced it from the anti-Semitism point of view. Listen, whatever brings you to the conversation, we're happy to pass these bills and create more protections, because we know our communities are at risk. Thanks again for having me tonight. You are in for such a treat. Simone Sanders, Miss Vogue Magazine this month. Lee Chapman, who I know is such a star when it comes to voting rights. This woman has won so many cases protecting our right to vote, and she's incredible. And Ashley Etienne is the one who is literally calling the shots on the Hill. So you're in great hands. Thanks for having me.
Oh, Congressman, thank you so much for spending time with us. You're amazing as always. Doing what you're doing, we really appreciate it. And thank you. And go in there tomorrow strong with that vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
So we have been finally joined by the amazing, the awesome, the smart, the fashionable, the beautiful inside and out, Link Simone Sanders. Link Simone is from the Capital City chapter of the Links. And most of you, again, as Link Evelyn said, know her to be the communications director and senior advisor to Vice President Joe Biden. And Link Simone, if we could turn to you to hear a little bit about sort of the importance of the election this year.
Perfect, thank you. I had some technical difficulties, but I think we finally worked it out. Thank you all for having me today. I do have the privilege of serving. This go around, I'm just a senior advisor to Vice President Biden. He has a comms director, Kate Bedingfield, but I'm very excited about this. We think that this election is, I know every single time folks say this election is critical. This is the most consequential election of our lifetime. We hear that over and over again, but I'm going to tell you, this election is critical. This is, in fact, the most consequential election of our lifetime, but protecting the right to vote is key to that. This election is actually, sometimes people say the pandemic is the backdrop of the election. Well, we really believe at the Biden campaign that this election is happening in the backdrop of this global pandemic and COVID-19, the coronavirus that we're all dealing with. And while we are facing a public health crisis, an economic crisis, it is very important that we still preserve democracy. And the fundamental tenet, one of the tenets of American democracy are free, fair, and open elections. We have voted in times of strife in this country. We voted during the Civil War. We voted during both world wars. And it will be critical and imperative that regardless of what side of the aisle you sit on, folks are able to safely cast their ballots this November. And so Vice President Biden is focused on this issue, as are we. I've touched base with a number of election experts. We've got one on this call. So I already know on this webinar, so I already know. Let's go get everybody straight. But the reality is that we have to take some true steps to ensure that elections are going to happen. Let me just be frank. Elections are happening, okay? It is literally, I know people like to say it's in the Constitution. It's actually a legislative issue. And so if elections weren't going to happen, it would be Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi, that moves those elections. And I see Ashley over here, and I don't think that's going to happen.
It's happening.
I don't think it's going to happen. So it is up to Congress if the election were not to go forth, because it is a legislative thing that has to take place, and you have to actually file legislation. But because elections are definitely going to happen, the question isn't whether elections happen, the question is whether the election is safe. And I just bring y'all to the example that happened in Wisconsin. You know, the information keeps changing. And so throughout the primary campaign, you know, Vice President Biden, we have a public health committee that he meets with every morning, along with his economic committee, and he gets a public health briefing every single day, and an economic briefing. Our public health officials are former Surgeon Generals of the United States of America. One of the public health officials in our committee is the former administrator of the Federal Drug Administration. So we've got some heavy hitters and some folks that know what they're talking about. And, you know, the information changed. At one point, folks were like, it is safe to go to the polls go vote in person, as long as you're not exhibiting symptoms or you don't feel sick. But as we know now, so one can be a carrier of the coronavirus and not have any symptoms. You can be asymptomatic. And so what we believe, and what I believe, and I think what's important for folks out there to know, is that one, everyone should have the opportunity to cast their ballot, whether it's vote by mail, whether it's an absentee voting. But two, the reality is that there is not enough time in this country to scale up full-scale vote-by-mail voting for every single state across the country. It's just not enough time. Like, even if it started today, there would not be enough time. And so our public health experts and our voting rights folks that we've spoken to have said it's very important to preserve an option for in-person voting this November. And so that, because, you know, the lack of in-person voting disproportionately affects disabled folks, disproportionately affects English second language folks, but it also disproportionately affects young people, older voters, and voters of color across the board, also low-income voters. So the reality is, people don't have to be able to vote in person at the polls. The question is, are municipalities, our elected officials doing everything they can to make it safe to do so? So those are some of the things that we're confronting. Lastly, I will say our campaign is still actively out there. You know, but this Saturday is the 1-year anniversary of Vice President Biden launching his campaign. We're launching a Soul Saturdays, where we're encouraging folks to go out there and do some acts of kindness digitally. Okay, no one needs to leave their house, because this is going to take all of us. Again, regardless of the side of the aisle you sit on, I think everybody on this webinar, unfortunately, knows someone who has either lost a loved one, a colleague, or a friend to the coronavirus, or we all know someone that has been positive, and we definitely all probably know someone whose job has been affected by it, whose small business didn't get the funding that they need because the corporations jumped in line because the president promoted them. So we are actively here to be a resource for folks. We know this is a long slog, but I just, you know, appreciate the work that everybody on this call and this webinar is doing. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the campaign, or voting in general.
Link Simone, thank you so much. Like I said, she has so much energy. She has so much information to share. What I'm going to do, if you're able to stay, we were going to go through with Ashley and Lee, and then we'll do some questions after the two of them. Okay.
Cool.
So thank you so much. For Miss Ashley Etienne, let me tell you a little bit. You've heard a few people mention and reference Ashley, but I'm going to let you know exactly how much power we have coming to our panel forefront right now. So Ashley is the communications director and senior advisor to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. She is the first woman and the first person of color to hold this powerful position. Among other things, Ashley's work in the Speaker's office has exposed the corruption and ethical lapses in the Trump administration, leading to the resignation of 6 cabinet secretaries. She also led strategic communications on the Trump-Russia connection and played a pivotal role in developing messaging around the impeachment. Prior to, Ashley served in the Obama White House as a special assistant and served as the director of communications for the U.S. cabinet. As a national leader, Ashley's been profiled by all the major national and political newspapers and several magazines, including the New York Times Magazine. She was named to Politico Playbook's New Guard Power List, Essence Magazine's 29 Powerful Black Women Running Obama's White House, and Marie Claire's New Guard list as well. So we are very excited to have her here. And Ashley and I are going to have a little bit of a conversation to break things up. And I'm going to kick it off right now with sort of this question. Ashley, so what's it like to work for the most powerful woman in American politics today?
Oh my gosh, intense. Can I say that? What's interesting is what you see is what you get with the speaker, and like she does not discriminate, so everybody can get it when it comes to the speaker. But it's been an incredible ride. It's one of those things where I've learned working with her. You have to be flexible. You have to be prepared for anything and everything at all times. And in an ideal world, you're ideally 2 steps ahead of her, which is impossible to even be. But it's an incredible ride, and it's been exhilarating. It's been intense. It's been a bit much at times. I've wanted to walk out. I mean, every emotion. It is literally a roller coaster at all times. But what's kept me there is, working for a woman who doesn't flinch. A woman who is purpose driven, is principled, and will really run over anybody in the interest of those principles, right? So that is what's really made this ride with her and this journey with her worth. And the other thing I would say too, just as a woman, it's been incredible to be in the front row seat of what I've considered to be a master class and watching a woman boss up, right? Because no one thought, when I took this job, everyone's like, you're insane. Why would you go from Obama's White House working for the Democratic leader? There's potentially no prospects of you winning back the House. Like, it could be you ending your political career on a down note. So it was really the biggest professional risk that I took, leaving the White House after it was all over and then going to her office. But again, it's been a front row seat in the masterclass, watching her, the historic wins in 2018, her resolve, her fortitude, and moving forward through that. The way that she's strategically confronted and undermined and dismantled Donald Trump has just been incredible to watch. And I think that the third thing I would say in terms of watching her is it really teaches all women, how you should move when you're trying to be at the very highest levels of any corporate, political, pick an industry in any space, how you actually boss up and, as she would say, own your power, know your power, then own your power. So it's just been an incredible ride. It's been incredible to watch. I will say that, the one thing I do appreciate about the speaker is that she did give me the opportunity to run the entire impeachment process. We have this talented Democratic Party. I love Simone. I'm so happy to see Simone and other young sisters pursue communications in the political space. Gives me encouragement that, look, I'm not the last one. There's still those right behind me. But understanding that I fight the fight also for them, that I make room and space for them. And she's given me the latitude and the responsibility to, to make history and be, again, not only the first woman and woman of color running her communication shop, but also running the entire impeachment effort. I mean, it's only happened 3 times. This is the 3rd time in American history. And I didn't do just the communications. Like, she's like, it's yours, run the whole thing. And I'm proud to say that, I haven't run into anyone that doesn't think that we did a superb job, with impeachment. And for me, that sends a signal that we can do these jobs. Women of color can do these jobs, that we exist, we can do these jobs, we can outperform anybody. So it's been incredible, and I wouldn't take it back for anything.
Thank you for that. Last cycle, we saw a record number of women, including a record number of women of color elected to Congress. We are in the full swing of the election year now, and how important is Black female leadership now?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything. It always has been. I mean, I'm, reminded of Harriet Tubman. We've always carried this stuff on our back, and today is absolutely no different. I mean, we just have to, fortify our backs and really drag everybody along with us, if that makes any sense, which we've always been able to do. So there's no question that Black women leadership is even more critically important today. But Congresswoman Underwood made a phenomenal point, is that when we come and arrive at the table, she, like I do, we bring our entire community with us, and we represent that entire community and all the interests that come with it, and all their equities. And so, again, because we have more Black women in Congress now, younger, more progressive women, they've expanded the conversation about issues that affect African American women, families, in the community at large. To your point about her starting the maternal health caucus, I mean, that didn't exist before her. So anyway, so I say all that to say that, you know, every woman of color that's new to the caucus has really added value. The women that I think probably get the least amount of attention are Native women. Those Deb Haaland, like those women, I mean, it brings me to tears every time I see them in the caucus meetings, because you know they're like, no matter where you came from, you came over our land. You know, this is Native land. You know, we've been here hundreds of years before you even showed up. You know what I mean? And so it's those, you know, those new voices to the caucus that provides another level of perspective. And in addition to that, it really expands our purpose and our vision, and it makes for a much better legislative product and policy as a whole.
The last few weeks have been all about sort of COVID relief packages, but so much work remains on access to affordable drugs, gun control, justice reform, and women's equality. What do you think we can get done outside of COVID relief in the remainder of this year? And what are sort of the speakers and House Democrats' priorities?
Well, to your point, all those things you've mentioned, we've passed legislation on them, and they're like now in Mitch McConnell's graveyard. So there are probably 250 plus bipartisan bills that we've sent over to the Senate that they've just not moved on. You know, it's the same similar posture we saw from McConnell when Barack Obama became the president, right? Which is like, I'm hell-bent and intent on ensuring that your agenda is not successful. So that's what we're dealing with on the Senate side. You know, a certain level of recalcitrant that really is not going to enable any progress on any of these issues, but we'll continue to try. I think the concern, though, is hearing what we're hearing from the experts and the healthcare professionals that, you know, we'll likely have another outbreak of the virus that we'll have to deal with. So it could become all-consuming. And then also, too, I mean, just by the virtue of not being able to meet in Congress limits the work that we can do. You can't have hearings, you can't develop legislation beyond sort of much of the stuff that we've been working on. So I'll say this. So there are some challenges that exist. It's unclear yet whether or not we'll be consumed with COVID response going even into the fall if we have another outbreak. But you know, the speaker is a workaholic and she likes to get it done. So there's no question in my mind that there is more on the agenda that we will achieve before we get to November. But can I just say one thing on the COVID response? We're tomorrow going to be voting on a select committee that's going to be doing oversight of the COVID response. That is incredibly important because what we just inserted, what I just sort of worked on and inserted in that language, in the actual text of that language and scope of the committee, is to look at the disparities in resources that's being provided, disparities in impact of the virus. But we're also going to look at all the money, and it's going to be headed up by Whit Clyburn. We're going to be looking at all the money in near real time that's going out the door to ensure that it's being applied efficiently, effectively, and equitably to all communities. So the work of that committee is going to be really, really critical because ideally we get to, you know, find out these answers in real time, and then we can introduce legislation that would ideally fix some of the disparities or address some of the disparities and all these other issues that we're seeing. We're also going to be looking at not only the federal dollars that are trickling down, but whether or not they're going to small businesses, whether or not they're going to Black and brown small businesses, women-owned businesses. So we'll be looking at literally surveying all the $2 to $3 trillion that we're putting on the ground to ensure that it's meeting the immediate needs of the American people and that every community is being impacted by taxpayer dollars. So that's going to be important going forward.
All right. Well, thank you very much for those comments. Hopefully you'll be able to stay and we can have some questions afterwards. And I just want everyone, there are two things I want to go back to really quickly before we move on to Lee. Number one, with Link Simone. Link Simone, you forgot to talk about a book that you wrote.
Oh yes, I wrote a book. Thank you. I have a book coming out May 19th, you know, just a little book. I have a book coming out May 19th from my publisher is HarperCollins, and the book is called No You Shut Up, Speaking Truth to Power and Reclaiming America. And it is all about how, you know, folks can get engaged and involved in this moment. I tell a few stories from my time on the campaign trail in 2016 with Senator Sanders as his press secretary. I tell folks why I decided to go work for Vice President Biden. And then I pull a lot from the classes that I taught. at Harvard and USC. And so who knew that right now we'd be in the midst of a pandemic and we'd be doing everything virtually because it is dangerous for us to interact in person. But I think now more than ever, I'd like to think I had the foresight to write for the moment. So I really hope folks enjoy the book. Give it a ring. It is everywhere where books are sold. You can pre-order now and on Audible. So thank you, Nicole.
All right. And lastly about Link Ashley, thank you for all those comments. But I also want people to know that Ashley has a beautiful daughter, young daughter that she raises as a single mom.
Too, as well. She's working on the book.
She raises as a single mom. And I when I worked on the Hill, I used to always say, I don't know how anybody could be a mom on the Hill, let alone a single mom of somebody as smart and rambunctious as Vivi is. And there's actually a very famous picture that got picked up with Vivi, her daughter, sitting on Nancy Pelosi's lap because she wanted to go up and ask the speaker a question one day. So
yeah, she took the microphone from her and took over her entire press conference at the age of 2.
So
she learned in utero. She came out ready,
Right, she's ready.
She's taking Simone's side. She's coming for you.
Take it. Can I just say, I don't know if Ashley has to run, but I think the work I think on behalf of all of us, the work that Ashley is doing on the Hill is so critical. She makes sure that our voices and our perspectives are front and center. Before I joined the campaign, I was an independent consultant and a commentator. Ashley would ensure that we all had the talking points, that we could give input. If there was anything that any of us thought needed to be happening, she heard us and then took our concerns back to Speaker Pelosi. So just kudos to Ashley, because she is truly the voice for, I would say, all women on the Hill, but Black women especially.
Thank you, sister.
Yes, thank you. So now we'd like to turn to our next Wonder Woman. And I say that because Lee Chapman is not only beautiful and strong, she's been out there fighting the fight with the law behind her and using it as her shield around the country. So Lee is actually a link from the Metropolitan DC chapter. She is the director of the Voting Rights Program at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, the largest civil rights coalition in the nation, made up of over 220 diverse organizations. Lee has experience advancing democracy issues for nonprofit organizations, state government, and political organizations. Prior to joining the Leadership Conference, she was Senior Policy Advisor at Let America Vote, where she advised the organization on election law and policy issues at the state and federal levels. Now, we know that voting is essential because it's our voice in politics. We also know that there are those who are actively attempting to suppress voting in communities of color, poor communities, and among immigrant populations. And we have seen them get very creative. So we look forward to the presentation that you have prepared for us this evening. Lee, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Link Nicole, and thank you to the Eastern Area Legislative Committee for having me on this virtual webinar to discuss protecting the right to vote in the wake of COVID-19. So I prepared a really short presentation about voter suppression in our country and what we're facing right now with COVID-19. So as Link Nicole mentioned, the Leadership Conference is the nation's largest civil rights coalition. We have a membership of over 220 organizations, and we were founded in 1950 and have lobbied for every major civil rights law that has passed in Congress. And our organization's mission is to build an America as good as its ideals. So as Link Simone mentioned, our democracy right now is broken, and we have a long way to go until we can achieve full participation in our political process. As you all know, voters of color, people with disabilities, young people, students, and people with limited English proficiency have historically faced and continue to face barriers to the ballot box in 2020. And I'm just going to go over a few examples of barriers that we have seen recently. On Super Tuesday, we saw Black voters stand in line at Texas Southern University for over 6 hours to cast their vote because there were only 12 working machines that were over 20 years old for a precinct with, tens of thousands of voters. The last voter didn't cast his ballot until 1:30 a.m. And this is an example of modern day voter suppression. Just last week, the Kentucky legislature overrode the governor's veto to implement a strict voter ID law for the November election. In the midst of a pandemic, when DMVs are closed and people cannot get IDs. This is another example of modern day voter suppression. Eligible voters continue to be purged from the voter rolls, and between 2016 and 2018, over 17 million voters were purged. And as we all have heard, the current governor of Georgia, who was formerly the Secretary of State, purged over 1.4 million Georgians while he was in office, and many of those were people of color. This is another example of modern day voter suppression. And the Leadership Conference wrote a report last year, and we looked at the number of polling places that were closed in communities of color since we lost the full protections of the Voting Rights Act in 2013. And we found that over 1,688 polling places were closed, and the worst offenders were Texas with 750 closures, and Georgia with over 214. And this is another example of modern day voter suppression. And now, as Representative Underwood touched on, we're seeing voter suppression manifest itself on social media platforms. And African Americans, were targeted by foreign actors in 2016. And evidence shows that we are still being targeted during this election cycle. And this is another example of modern day voter suppression. So since now we have COVID-19, and that's another barrier of the ballot box that marginalized communities are facing. And as we all know, communities of color are being hit the hardest by the virus. So we only have to look at Wisconsin's disastrous primary to see how voters of color were impacted by COVID-19. And yesterday we learned that at least 7 people were infected at Wisconsin polling places with COVID. And so no one should have to choose between their safety and their vote. With under 7 months until the general election, states have no time to spare in preparing for November amid this pandemic. And given this country's dark history of denying voters of color access to the ballot box, we must be vigilant to guard against any obstacles to prevent our communities from voting. That means Congress must ensure every person's voice and vote count as we build the future together. As we've all touched on, this is a massive undertaking. Congress recently passed a relief package, but the bill fell woefully short of protecting our democracy. Lawmakers approved only $400 million for state election assistance, and civil rights groups like the Leadership Conference and our coalition are calling on Congress to secure an additional $3.6 billion of funding to afford that every voter has a fair, safe, and accessible opportunity to cast their ballot. Link Simone touched on this, but one thing that some people have pitched is that vote by mail is the universal solution to voter access in this pandemic. And while vote by mail is essential, and it's an essential part of the election response plan, voters must also have a clear range of options to cast their ballots. And focusing exclusively on vote by mail could disenfranchise voters of color and other communities that have historically faced barriers to the ballot. Surveys show that states reject absentee ballots at far greater rates for Black, Latino, and other voters of color than for white voters. And studies have also shown that voters of color vote by mail at lower rates, sometimes due to historical mistrust of the postal system and mail-in ballot process. Vote by mail systems also impose hurdles for Native Americans living on tribal lands, given that many have limited or no access to the Postal Service. And voting by mail does not adequately serve communities that tend to move frequently, like students and low-income families. It's still an important option, but we have to have guardrails in place, including prepaid postage, the ability to postmark an absentee ballot on or before Election Day, relaxing technical requirements, and increased availability of drop boxes. That is why, in addition to vote by mail, we are recommending that states need to give voters options for safe voting amid the pandemic. Along with expanding vote by mail, states must also ensure full voter access by establishing safe in-person polling places. And states should extend early voting periods for at least 2 weeks prior to the election. We need to expand online voter registration options and distribute information to the public about voting changes. So Link Sisters, we need you to join us to advocate for free, fair, and safe elections in 2020. There is tremendous work that needs to be done to put pressure on our federal and state lawmakers to make sure that communities of color aren't further disenfranchised by COVID-19. States and counties are now making critical decisions on how they're going to implement the remaining primaries and general election and how accessible elections will be. We need to demand that communities of color and those areas that are being hit the hardest by COVID-19 aren't left behind. So we launched a campaign at the Leadership Conference. It's called And Still I Vote. And the whole concept behind it is, despite the voter suppression, despite COVID-19, despite the barriers, we're still going to vote in this election. And as you can see, it's a celebrity-studded campaign. And we are asking you to join the fight to really shine a light on voter suppression, shine a light on who is most impacted, and mobilize and fight. So I would encourage you all to visit our website. It's andstillivote.org, and to sign up. We're hosting a National Day of Action demanding safe and accessible elections on May 5th. And we would love for our Link Sisters in the Eastern area and across the country to get involved. This is a picture from Selma Jubilee. It was the 55th anniversary, and that's when we launched the campaign of And Still I Vote. And we were so happy to have the Links Incorporate support that campaign. But just in closing, I just wanted to say, these are tough times for everyone, but no one should have to choose between their public health and a functioning democracy. And the decisions our leaders make now will determine not just how we weather this storm, but also the kind of democracy we will have when it's over. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. If you're interested in contacting me and getting involved, I put my email on this screen. It's chapman@civilrights.org.
Thank you so much, Lee. I mean, there was a lot of information that you dropped there. And I think one of the most disturbing things to me is that, people, think about barriers to voting and they're thinking of poll taxes and very traditional things like that. I think one of the other things that we have to understand is how much money the other side is really putting into all of those different types of barriers to voting that you talked about, the misinformation campaign, that they're supporting these state and local government officials for purging rolls and voter ID laws. I really appreciate you highlighting this. What we're going to do now is that we're going to take some questions. So ladies on the side, you can send questions in for Simone, for Lee, or for Ashley. And if you could just indicate which person that you're asking, some of them may be appropriate for all of them. But I'm going to take the prerogative and just kick off. But Lee, I know in my Facebook, feed, I often find I'm fighting with a couple of people about what is voter suppression, what actually, is it, and why shouldn't they have voter IDs? And I think maybe if you could tell us the best way to sort of respond to that, because, for me, I get really annoyed when what I know, my study of the Constitution is that it doesn't say that you only get to vote if you voted in the last 3 elections. It doesn't say anything about whether or not you've broken the law, whether or not you get to vote. It doesn't say anything like that. And yet all of these things are up here, and they're things that we've been accustomed to dealing with. Like all of us went along with, disenfranchising people who've committed crimes. But those are some of those people who get rehabilitated are the very ones who need to get out there and get in the political process. So I don't know if any, actually for all 3 of you all, if you want to talk about any of that, just sort of so that all the women on the call can know the best way to sort of respond back to that, and how we can also approach our local and state officials with the best arguments.
Yeah, I'll take that with voter ID. I was one of the litigators that sued the state of Wisconsin over their restrictive voter ID requirement. Unfortunately, we lost, but when we talk about voter ID laws, it doesn't seem that bad, but you have to think about the cost of getting an ID, the cost of getting a birth certificate, all these underlying documents. I had a plaintiff in that case who was 92 years old. She was born to a midwife in Mississippi. She had no birth certificate, and she voted in every single election. She was a poll worker, and her daughter had to spend over $2,000 in legal fees to get her a birth certificate. You know, so this is a modern day poll tax. It's really impacting people. Not everyone can pay $2,000 for, you know, a birth certificate when people are trying to figure out how to like feed their families. So I think always talking about these stories and how it impacts real people is critical as we're talking about these issues.
Ashley or Simone, do you have anything to comment in here?
No,
And
I mean,
ladies,
I
while
think,
you're commenting, feel free to send me your questions.
I think what's going to be really important, especially for the links and just at the community level, is there some ground up pressure around elections. You know, it's clear that Mitch McConnell is done all that he's going to do. He doesn't, I mean, you know, it's almost like they want foreign interference. I mean, I don't really understand it. You know, I don't know where all the patriots are. It seems like no one really cares anymore, except for us. We're the only ones screaming about it because we're going to be the ones disenfranchised, which to some degree is their preference. So I think from our perspective, you know, we're going to continue to apply pressure on Mitch McConnell to act. We're looking at doing some things in the fall that'll apply some additional pressure, but it's very clear that, you know, we've sort of pushed him to his limits on this issue. So I think it's all the more important that the pressure has to come from the ground up and focus primarily at the state level. That's where we're going to drive the conversation. That's where I think the pressure is going to work in a way that it won't work at the federal level. So that's my input is focus your pressure and attention at the state level. We'll continue to do our part here, but you know, it's clear to us that they clearly want the foreign interference and the disenfranchisement and the disinformation campaigns and all that stuff to keep us at home. So Simone, I don't know if you had some more to add.
I mean, the only thing as I'd add to that is because, to Ashley's point, that Mitch McConnell is not trying to allocate another cent to this effort, and Lee just told us we need like $3.2 billion at least. Public-private partnerships are going to be really important here. I have yet to see a number of companies or well-to-do folks or individuals step up and say, how can we give money to secretaries of states or to organizations who are organizing and doing this work, like the Leadership Conference across the country, or the NAACP, for example? How can we help fund these efforts to ensure that there are stamps, to ensure, because I mean, part of this is a money issue. Like some of these municipalities do not have the funds to mail everyone a ballot and also include a stamp on that ballot to make sure that they can send it back. So just some practical things. I know there are some very powerful ladies on this call. So think about what the links could do.
The other thing I would raise too is, don't forget, we allocated $300 billion. That may be a little short of what we allocated, but many of the states turned the money down. You know, so there also has to be a communication between us and the ground, so that you guys are alerted to what your governors and local elected officials are receiving or not receiving. Because I agree, the funding is an issue, but it's a bigger problem that the states are saying, I don't even want the federal money that you're giving me, which we're seeing that from a lot of states. And I think you guys should know that. So we need to actually probably have better lines of communication so that you know sort of where we are in the process, what we are hearing from states and local officials, so that it can better inform your strategies and the questions and the pressure you need to apply on the ground.
Okay, we've got some questions that have come in here, actually quite a few of them. So here's one from Hassani Prats. I received a call today from an advocate in Indiana that said they normally have 50 voting polls in her county, and she was notified from today that they're only going to have 5 polls in the next election. Have you heard about this, and what can we do to reverse it?
Yeah, it happened in Wisconsin. I mean, Lee, it happened in Wisconsin. Now, part of now, this is a two-pronged thing. Sometimes it's straight up voter suppression and they are closing the polls. But some of it in Wisconsin was, particularly in Milwaukee County, that they did not have enough poll workers to work all the polls. So in Milwaukee County, the county in which Milwaukee is situated, a majority African-American county in Wisconsin, usually there are 180 polling places in Milwaukee County. This past primary, there were 5 from 180, and that's because they did not have poll workers to work the polls. Now, people were scared. Now, poll workers, oftentimes young people like myself, we are not just running out there to volunteer to work the polls. You know, Lee said her client was 92 years old. She was a poll worker. And so some of this is we need some young people to step up.
and say that we are willing and wanting to ensure that democracy carries on and we want to be poll workers. But also some of it is putting pressure on state and local governments to ensure that they can make sure the polls are safe. And if they can't ensure the polls are safe, I'm telling you, I'm not even trying to go up out there. Okay, I need some PPE. Y'all got PPE for the healthcare workers. Do you have some PPE for the poll workers? Okay.
Yeah,
So here's.
I would just add that is, you know, even before COVID, we're seeing polling place closures in communities of color specifically. And I feel like election officials who don't have our best interests in heart are going to be closing even more polling places in communities of color. So when you hear about that, it's important to actually go to your election official meeting, you know, speak out, make sure that when they do have polling places in your communities, that they're actually distributed in places where voters can get to them. So this is just another way that people are going to suppress the vote, and we're going to see it more as we get closer to November.
All right, I have a question here. Let me see here. Oops. It says from April Horton, we are seeing COVID-19 already affecting some of the census numbers. Do you, Simone, think there will be low voter turnout overall?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think, and I keep going back to Wisconsin because I think Wisconsin is the best example we have of how folks have responded to efforts to rampantly suppress the vote in the era of the coronavirus, but also the want for folks to have their voices heard. And I mean, the governor in Wisconsin, Governor Evers, he wanted to protect the health and safety of people at the polls. He issued an executive order to not have in-person voting on election day and expand vote by mail options. And the Republicans in his state shut him down. So, and frankly, the Supreme Court of the United States of America also said they couldn't weigh in. It's another story. So I would say, but voter turnout was there were long lines in Wisconsin on election day. So, you know, I just think it depends. I think people know how important this election is. I frankly, and I think a lot of people on this call believe we cannot afford another 4 years of Donald Trump. Look at what's happening. 22 million people have filed for unemployment. It did not have to be this way. Had the White House acted in February, in January, had they heeded the warnings and reports from intelligence officials, we would not be here. And so while Speaker Pelosi and folks in Democrats in Congress are doing everything that they can, the White House hasn't held up its end of the bargain. And so if you're upset with being quarantined in your home, if you would like to get back to work, if you want your kids to go back to school and you're tired of homeschooling, if you are hurt by what you're seeing, if you are tired of seeing death and the anxiety that this virus has brought, it is very important that we make our voices heard in November. And so we have to take that message out to communities. So I am confident in the American people. I think people want to go cast their ballot, and they're going to do everything they can to ensure that their voices are heard.
Okay. We got a lot of questions about how people who either live in non-battleground states or different states can start to get more active in the presidential campaign. I don't know if we can take that on. And then I will add on to this a little bit for Ashley. Again, not only is it a presidential campaign year, but you've got 100% of the U.S. House and 1/3 of the Senate up for re-election in November. All of those elections matter. So I don't know if Ashley, you want to talk about that? Link, Simone, you might want to kick us off.
I'll just say we are virtually organizing right now, but we're also holding webinars and roundtables such as this. We're hoping to do some with a Black woman's like roundtable, if you will, with the vice president in the next couple of weeks. So I just encourage you to email me if you have questions. I'm happy to loop you up with our women's vote director. You can use my personal email, which I'm sure y'all can find on the site, but it's SimoneSanders12@gmail.com, or you can hit me at my Biden email. It's ssanders@joebiden.com. But we are organizing. I need you. I want you. Some of y'all already hit me up and texting. I will text back. I promise. Okay. We are campaigning from the basement.
And the only thing I would add to that is you're absolutely right. So everyone's up come November, you know, and we say, it feels like almost every election we say this is the most important election. But this really is the most important election we've ever experienced. I'm with Simone. I can't imagine, you know, going through this for another 4 years. I mean, the lack of leadership on every front, not just the coronavirus. I mean, you know, I almost, you know, regrettably have to say this, but almost you know, if you're, you know, if you're a religious person and a spiritual person, you might feel like this is all part of the larger plan to get, you know, remarkable, unprecedented turnout come November, because that's the only way you're gonna root out this particular cancer, i.e. Donald Trump. I mean, so it is incredible what we're dealing with, but I don't know any other way to drive home the point with people that there are consequences for your vote and consequences for inaction. You know, I think the one thing as a party we have to ensure is that we don't make the same mistakes of 2016. And that is to, you know, decide, you know, we're going to crowd out all the noise and not show up. That we're going to allow some disinformation campaign about something Biden may have said 20 years ago affect whether or not we come out and vote Donald Trump out of office, right? Like all of those lessons, are we going to coalesce as one party and really leverage all the resources and assets from the former president to the former FLOTUS, like all hands on deck approach to rooting out this particular cancer? I mean, that's what really we have to commit ourselves to, not only as a people, but as a party, because we can't afford not one more day of this. I mean, I'm about to lose my mind over here. It's just too much. Like,
Same.
So there are a lot of questions, ladies, for follow up with you. So I want everyone on the call to know that number one, we're going to be sending around Lee's presentation. It'll be posted in the Eastern Area website. In addition, we can circulate the email and contact information for Lee, for Simone, and Ashley, and how to get in touch with her if you have those specific questions, or you or the organization you either work with or your chapter wants to partner or get more involved. So all of that's going to come around. There is a question here that says, well, the question is, can we do a class action lawsuit about the closure of polling places in Black communities? So Lee, I know you touched a little bit on this, and I don't know if you could talk a little bit about if we had a chapter that wanted to get involved in this, how do we figure out where you all are suing and operating, and how can we help?
Yeah, so there are lots of groups that bring lawsuits about polling place closures. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund is one of them. The problem is lawsuits are so expensive, and you know, with lawsuits it takes a long time for you to get a remedy. And by that time the election has happened, voters are already disenfranchised. So yes, it's one of the tools that we use in the toolbox, but it's important that we are advocating on the front end. So if you want to join the leadership conference, join and Still I Vote. We really need to build this army of organizers, this army of people who are going out and making sure that voters have safe, accessible elections. And that includes, you know, making sure you have an accessible polling place, that it's in communities of color, and they're not shutting them down. So we're trying to really front load the advocacy, because unfortunately, by the time the election happens, there's no do-overs, right?
Mm-hmm.
No do-overs at all. This election's going to happen, whether, you know, we do want it to happen. It's going to happen. So actually, Link, Simone, we've got a lot of questions for you and about. I
already know what y'all want to know. Look, I don't got no news to break about the VP candidate. Okay. What I will tell you is this: Vice President Biden committed in the last debate, the final debate actually, between him and Senator Sanders, that he intends to pick a woman as his vice president. That was not a decision he made callously. It's if you've heard him speak, this is something he has alluded to over and over again, but he picked the last debate to make a very public announcement and commitment, because it was a huge commitment and he wanted the most people to see and hear this. Which woman is he going to pick? I cannot tell you right now. There are lots of qualified candidates out there. Vice President Biden is also committed to putting a Black woman on the Supreme Court. I've gotten questions that say, well, does that mean that he's not picking a Black woman as a VP? No, that is not what that means. That just means he's definitely picking a Black woman on the Supreme Court. And if he has an opportunity to put forth a nominee, that nominee will be a Black woman with the qualifications and the expertise to get the job done. But his vice presidential candidate nominee may be a woman of color. We do not know. Our process has yet to officially begin.
I will tell you who it won't be, and that's Nancy. So
it will not be Speaker Pelosi.
Somebody's got to hold it down, right? Somebody's got to hold it down in the meantime until we occupy the West Wing again.
So funny that you knew that's what the question was.
I knew. I've been getting texts all day. I saw the CNN segment. I called them up. I was like, y'all are problematic.
All right, Lee, maybe, and this isn't just because I know you're such a powerhouse lawyer. Link Simone sort of touched on this about the Supreme Court. It's interesting because in the last election, the Supreme Court, and sort of making it a more conservative court, was actually a lot of incentive for the other, well, for conservatives to vote. And in fact, you know, Mitch McConnell has crowed about the fact that this is going to be one of the standouts of his living legacy, is that he has tipped the scales of the Supreme Court. And Simone talked about, you know, the next president, whoever he may be, because I used to be able to say he or she, but now we're going to say he, whoever he may be, they may really get the opportunity to fill 2 or more Supreme Court positions. Can you talk a little bit about this and how it's sort of, this should be something that we as chapters in the Eastern area should also be talking about, why the Supreme Court matters, what they've been doing with laws, this kind of thing?
Yeah, the courts are so important, and the Leadership Conference has an entire program about courts. We work on 11 different issues. Voting rights is just one of them. We have a whole director who works on courts and judicial nominations. One thing that's important to note is that President Trump has been so successful at nominating federal judges. And it's something that kind of flies under the radar, but you know, he's appointed over like 100, I think it's 180 or something federal judges, and these are lifetime.
1 in 3. 1 in 3 of the federal judges currently sitting on the bench now.
Yes, and these are lifetime appointments. So the damage is really has been done. So, you know, not only do we have to look at the Supreme Court, we also have to look at, you know, the lower courts, and that's why it's so important to have elected leaders that, you know, care about civil and human rights and our issues, because a lot of these cases go through the courts, and we'll be feeling this impact for our lifetimes and, you know, our children's lifetimes too. So
one thing can I just add one thing on there? I think the other thing that people don't think about is, you know, Republicans play a long game. The judges is a long game. You know, and I hadn't thought about this issue sort of aside from, you know, reproductive rights and sort of big issues like voting that you think about when you think about the courts, but it's really affected our ability to pursue a lot of the scandalous things that Donald Trump's doing. So in other words, the travel ban, the tax on ACA, the tax on the census, our entire legal strategy is affected by the fact that there's only 1 or 2 friendly courts that we can actually go to. So you're talking about, it has a demonstrative impact on the state of our democracy that we're not really even thinking about. So we can't be a full check on the White House and the administration if we've lost all the courts, right? Because all these guys are just going to side with Donald Trump, and we're going to lose all these cases, and we lose standing, and then all of a sudden it impacts the entire institution and our checks and balances, which gets back to like the fundamentals of our democracy and our Constitution. So, you know, so that's one thing to think about as we think about the judges, is that they're playing a really, really long game that's putting us at a disadvantage in a lot of different ways on a lot of different fronts for a long time.
So ladies, we're coming to the end of our time here. So I do want to thank you, but you know, we've talked about a lot of really heavy and weighty things. So I'd like to actually end in one fun question for each of our panelists, which is this: what's been the one thing that has kept you sane in this time of quarantine? If I could hear from each one of the 3 of you, and then I'm going to throw it back to Link Evelyn to close us out here.
Well, I know what's kept me sane. Netflix and the Hulu and everything, but I would also argue what's kept me, you know, fed and happy and why I have to go on these walks is my partner's cooking. So he's got something in this crock pot right now, turkey wings, that I will be attacking when this call is over.
And mine is like Megan Thee Stallion. I mean, it's really kind of crazy, but Hot Girl Summer was like the song that comes to mind when I get in really intense environments and I'm about to lose it. That song plays over and over in my head, and all of a sudden it just gives me like a sense of joy and like keeps me moving.
Yeah.
I would say, you know, the issues we're working on are so tough right now, and I'm actually quarantining with my family in California, which is nice for me to be able to work on, you know, DC issues from a distance. So my family has been keeping me sane.
Great, great. Well, thank you. Thank you all our panelists, to Simone and Ashley and Lee, our beloved Link sisters. Thank you so much for being with us tonight and being open and honest. I love that statement, Ashley. The speaker, own your power and know your power. And we as Link women, we know our power. We're going to use it. We're going to talk, speak loud, and use our voices on election day. And we're going to bring some others to the polls with us. We will not sit home on election day. And please let the speaker know that we support her, we love her, and tell her to just keep keeping on, because she is doing a great job. So thank you.
Love you back. And she always says that Black women are the smartest voters.
Yep, absolutely.
Like, Black women, we would be nowhere without Black women. So she makes it abundantly clear at all times. But thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. And we want you to know, Link sisters who have joined us tonight, thank you for being with us this evening. This program has been recorded, so it will be on the Eastern Area website. It will definitely be on there, so you can go back. Tell other people how great this was. Tell them what the Eastern Area Legislative and Public Affairs Committee is doing, and to look at this virtual town hall meeting. It will be on our website. And we have a flyer to come up, because we cannot let this end without reminding you to be counted. Census 2020, Link sisters, please, please fill out those census forms. Tell your friends, make sure your friends are counted. We all have to be counted. The deadline has been extended until the end of July. So please take time. You're home. You're relaxing, fill out that form and send it back in. We have got to be counted in this census this year, so we can more resources to our communities, to people that need that help. We have got to be counted this year. So please fill that form out, be counted. Also know that the Eastern Area will put together our toolkit. You've seen our legislative and public affairs toolkits on the website. We will do another toolkit around voting and the importance of voting. So look for that. Share that with your chapter members. Share that with your friends. Every single solitary person in this country must vote in November. So again, thank you to our wonderful Eastern Area Director. Thank you for your vision. Thank you for your support, for letting us do this. You are absolutely awesome. And I do have to give another shout out to my co-chair, Link, Nicole Venable. Nicole, she's very modest, but she's a very
Nicole.
Yes, Nicole is a very successful lobbyist on the Hill. And she contacted everybody. This was her dream. This was her baby. And she put it all together. And she is just phenomenal. So thank you, Link Nicole, for all of your hard work in making this happen. And Link sisters, again, we want you to stay in shelter. We want you to be safe. We want you to please take care of yourselves. Stay safe, be safe, and know that we love you. And we'll see you at the next virtual town hall meeting. Or maybe next time we'll see you in person. But wherever it is, we are going to make sure we bring the information to you as you own your power. Thank you, Link sisters. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.